everyone. This is Professor Philip Travis here, and we are here in southern France, in Avignon, which is fairly close to Marseille. It's in the south of France, and we are here at the Palace of the Popes. This is a very, very interesting site, both for medieval history, but also for the history of the period following the Protestant Reformation and the transformations that engulfed Europe following the 1500s. So this palace was the site, the home of the popes during much of the 1300s, during the late Middle Ages. From 1309 to 1377, there and about, several popes resided here. And of course, when we think about papacy, we think about the Vatican, we think about Rome. But during this period of the late Middle Ages, the Vatican had really become somewhat deteriorated. And there was a great deal of influence from France in the Catholic Church. And this led to the papacy, briefly, moving here to Avignon. Now, why is this so significant? It's significant for more than just the history of Catholicism. This is significant because it begins really a fundamental sort of fracturing in the authority of the Catholic Church. Throughout the Middle Ages, of course, the Catholic Church in Christendom and also in the Holy Roman Empire was really the final political authority, of which any king or monarch, if you will, had less power. The Catholic Church was the supreme power. With the beginning of what is sometimes called the Avignon Captivity, sometimes called the Great Schism, we see the development of a process of questioning the authority of the Catholic Church. And this was furthermore enhanced by, of course, a tremendous or tragic, terrible event that occurs in the middle of the 1300s, of course, the Black Death. When the Black Death came here to Avignon, the Pope was Pope Clement VI, I believe. And Pope Clement was, of course, the head Catholic authority. And the Catholic Church was trying to find ways to deal with the Black Death. And it had been coming up through Sicily, through Italy. It had arrived in southern Europe from Turkey aboard ships. Of course, it was a disease. There were two types, bubonic plague, carried by fleas that traveled on rats on board ships. And when it arrived here, the papacy went to great lengths to try to find a way to prevent the plague from devastating Avignon. He had doctors that investigated the writings of Arabic scholars. And actually, this is a very interesting lesson of history because we learned that the Islamic world at the time made great contributions to knowledge that really contributed to Western Europe. And Arabic scholars were one of the first places that scholars in Christendom went. They had to read Arabic, and they went there to investigate potential ways of combating the plague. Even though those scholars were not entirely accurate, those working for the Pope, for Christendom, learned that they believed that it was an infested, polluted cloud, if you will, that was causing the plague. And so they believed that if they lit fires around the Pope, lit these torches around the Pope, that it would somehow purify the air and would prevent the plague from decimating Avignon. The Pope was skeptical, and of course that didn't work. And ultimately, the Pope, really ceased that type of procedure and really went to, with other members of his priesthood, went to helping out those who were suffering from the plague. Pope Clement never actually got the plague, though he died in 1352. And it was actually one of his doctors, G. de Chiliac, that actually discovered that the plague was in fact both a pneumonic and a bubonic plague. G. de Chiliac was infected with the plague, and he actually lived. And he wrote about it, and we've learned a great deal from his testimony. Now, this is where we get to the whole Protestant Reformation thing that starts in the 1500s, in a fracturing of the Catholic Church authority. Because the Catholic Church had been almost completely unable to explain what the plague was about, And this is a terrible event in Europe, the most devastating pandemic that ever hit Europe, or epidemic that ever hit Europe. The Catholic Church had no answer, had no solution. The plague decimated towns. Some towns entirely ceased to exist in plague. And the Catholic Church had really no answer to it. Some groups, like the Flagellants, which were actually initially called by the Pope, blamed the Jews for polluting the drinking water, and they persecuted Jews. There were Jewish pogroms that occurred as a result of this. But ultimately, the Catholic Church had no real answer for the plague, and the plague ran its course. That, coupled with the fact that the papacy wasn't residing in Italy, really began the first steps towards people beginning to question the authority of the church. Was this a legitimate papacy? It was in France. At one time, there was actually 3 popes. So was this a legitimate papacy? Was this a legitimate church? This church had no answer to the Black Death. So this led to a criticism of the Catholic Church. And of course, ultimately, as the power of the Catholic Church began to increasingly weaken during the late Middle Ages and giving rise ultimately into the Renaissance, we see the emergence of the scientific revolution, eventually the Enlightenment, and of course a reforming of governments. In France, the absolutist monarchy of Louis XIV, which is the first absolutist monarchy to really assert a power well beyond the power of the Pope. In places like the Dutch Republic, you have the emergence of representative government, and also, of course, in Great Britain, you have the slow emergence of concepts like Bills of Rights, the English Bill of Rights, and, of course, the emergence of a parliamentary monarchy following the English Civil War. And in some respects, it all began here with Pope Clement, with the Black Death, and what's sometimes referred to as the Avignon Captivity of the Catholic Church here in southern France, near Marseille.